And one of my favorite things I like to, think about or quote is, grief is love in action. And if you see it in that kind of term, I think it will totally change your mind about grief. And so
because it takes it from being passive to being active in that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And another thing, as I was talking about the world grieving, that I really have been thinking a lot about lately is I think what we're seeing, and I think that's where you come, the result of protests, the result of a lot of things can really come out of grief.
Sure. We're good? You all ready? You good? Ready? Good. All right, ready? All right. What's good, y'all? Welcome back to Conversation Piece, your place to discover the untold stories of Indianapolis. My name is Patrick Armstrong. I am your host, and this is The Open Door, a monthly series where we literally open the studio door and sit down with the community members of this city to talk about whatever is on their hearts. If you want to learn more or you're interested in participating, head to conversationpiecePod.com and click on The Open Door to learn more. Shout out to Life in Indy, last but not least, for sponsoring this series as well. Without further ado, we're going to get right into it. My guest today is Katresha Taylor. Katresha, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Patrick. It's so great to be here. I feel so honored.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
The honor is all mine, and I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. First up, for people watching or listening right now who don't know who you are, do you mind sharing just a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So my name's Katresha, and he nailed that. That's already a big thing. I always like to give people praise for that, having a unique name that's kind of followed me my whole life, that I always give people credit for that. But yeah, so I am Hoosier born and raised. I'm actually from Southern Indiana. I'm from Bedford.
Okay.
So if anyone knows anything about Bedford, it's the limestone capital of the world. So that's what, we kind of like to brag about. Go
sure.
Stars. Bedford,
limestone
North
everywhere.
Lawrence.
So,
yep.
and
Damon
not just
Bailey,
here, but everywhere.
That's the other, the other thing. So when I moved up here, literally, I think actually it was Damon Bailey is more what I heard about. So it's just kind of funny. So yeah, so basketball, big basketball place, right? So, but then I moved up here to Indianapolis to attend the University of Indianapolis. It's actually where I went to college and graduated. Go Greyhounds. Love that school. And then kind of had migrated more north. So I'm more in the northern suburbs now, but definitely have a heart and love for Indianapolis in the community. I have been working in hospice actually for over 20 years. I started out very young. We might not do the total math on that, but pretty much out of college.
For sure.
Actually. And I do volunteer coordinating. So I do work with volunteers. So volunteering is a very important thing for me in general. Myself doing it. So giving back to the community, that's why I was really drawn to this podcast, but obviously working with volunteers too.
Sure.
But I'm also the bereavement coordinator as well. So kind of an interesting also switch there, but grief definitely has become like a passion of mine, is to kind of educate about grief and talk about it. And it's having conversations like this, because I think it's extremely important to have these open conversations and talk about it and make it normal. Actually, normalizing grief is actually one of the things I really want, that I thought would be a good conversation for today.
Yeah.
To kind of, bring it back to a community-focused thing as well. So
I love that. I think that's the title of this episode. Let's normalize talking about grief. Let's normalize the grieving process. I don't even know what it looks like. Let's start there and let's dive in. Like, what does it look like to normalize grief? You have over 2 decades in this work. What does that look like?
Honestly, that's the thing about grief, is that there is no normal path. So we normalize it by talking about it, but it's unique. I know that's a very cliche thing. You probably have heard a lot of that, but it is. It's unique to each individual.
Definitely.
But one of the things I really have been really fascinated by lately is communal grieving. So the idea of community grieving is, I do think we're in a time in our world right now that we're grieving.
Yeah.
As a world, as our country, as a community. And it really kind of giving some thought. So this actually kind of goes back. It's a bit interesting is I kind of want to focus on the LA fires.
Okay, sure.
Interesting enough, because I was on my TikToks during that time, right? So, and I remember watching a lot of TikToks from celebrities or different people from the LA fires and them expressing their grief.
Yeah.
on that platform, which I think social media has done a lot for allowing people to express grief openly, good and bad ways, right? But I kept on wanting to shout at my phone because I was becoming very upset when I would be hearing the comments from people saying they're rich, they're famous, they have no right to grieve. And I'm like, no, everyone has a right to grieve. We're human. It should not matter, no socioeconomic status, nothing. And that was really bothering me, and it really had me thinking about this is the perception we have with grief. I think that's a perfect example of we think, why? Because you have money, you're wealthy, you have a certain status, you're not allowed to grieve something. And I mean, obviously, I don't believe that at all. I mean, I think everyone has a right. It's a loss. And as humans, that's the one thing we can all relate to is loss. So that really got me really thinking of, once again, that we just have this definition of grief that's just, I just don't think it's healthy.
Yeah.
And once again, leading back to why do we not allow people just to grieve? It's, that is the one thing I've noticed. Why are we so scared to talk about it? Why do we not allow people just to grieve?
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things I like to, think about or quote is, grief is love in action. And if you see it in that kind of term, I think it will totally change your mind about grief. And so
because it takes it from being passive to being active in that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And another thing, as I was talking about the world grieving, that I really have been thinking a lot about lately is I think what we're seeing, and I think that's where you come, the result of protests, the result of a lot of things can really come out of grief.
Sure.
And that can be a very healthy...
Yeah, because we feel it and then we need to have a means of expressing it.
Exactly.
And like you said, where we have a long history of maybe not having conversations or maybe even stifling the expression of grief because it maybe makes us feel uncomfortable. What does that look like for you? You talked about it's almost like a redefining of what grief means. How have you kind of built or gotten to your definition of what grief is during your time doing the work that you've done?
That's a really great question. A lot of it came professionally, obviously working with people and working in hospice, but also personally. I've had a lot of loss in my life. And so I've lost both my parents. My mother died in 2009. My dad died in 2012. Both were only in their 50s. So, and then during that period of time too, I lost several other family members, a friend. This was on top of working for hospice. So I was surrounded by, I call that my period of time, probably about 7 to 8 years of death consistently in my personal life and in my professional life.
Yeah.
So of course with that, it changes you.
For sure.
And the positive things of experiencing it personally it did change me to be able to provide better care to our patients, to the people who are grieving, because I was able to understand it on a whole other level.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just from personal and professional experience and just talking with several, probably hundreds at this point, of people who are grieving.
Sure. And I think when you find yourself having these experiences, these conversations over and over again, you can't kind of help, and maybe just from my perspective, you can't help but move towards wanting to understand what it means to grieve in community. And I appreciate you saying that's kind of been the focus now. And I was wondering if there were any specific instances along the way in your journey where you saw communal grieving happening in a way that you're that you now find yourself tapping into to be that's a great experience that maybe we can model for other folks, or I can model for folks in my work.
No, I love that too, because so really in the grieving world, there's two different types of grievers.
Okay.
And this can kind of go into more, this is kind of a generalization.
Sure.
And there are really doer grievers. Sorry, not really acting grievers. That doesn't make any sense. But doer grievers. And then there's more emotional grievers.
Okay.
I'm a doer griever. And actually, I learned that because of the death of my parents. Because my instinct was so my mom died of breast cancer. And my dad died of a massive heart attack. So both of those cases, I ended up just going full throttle into doing stuff for Susan G. Komen. I mean, doing all the walks.
Yeah.
I did fundraisers. I did stuff for the American Heart Association. I was just out here. And then I really look back now, because my heart really is, I'm very much a servant type of person anyway.
Yeah.
But I realized that was me grieving.
Sure.
Was me being able, so what I thought was really kind of interesting as we were talking about community grieving. I guarantee you almost every non-for-profit or any type of fundraiser, big event, a walk, if you think of all those that go around in our community, more than likely probably started from someone who was grieving something.
For sure.
Yeah. And then, but look at the impact those people have made, not only with money, obviously big fundraising that have been able to lead to some major, things in like research and things like that, but just in general, bringing people together.
Yeah.
When you go on one of those walks, and I'm sure you've done those, right? Where you've done something very similar, that feeling of coming together. But it's actually, that's what I think is really kind of beautiful about it is, yes, we're grieving something, but we're doing it for kind of for a better cause too. And that kind of brings people together. So I have found that, and that's not everybody's way, but those who are kind of the active doer grievers, so they're going out there and they are volunteering.
Yeah.
I get a lot of volunteers because they have experience of family members who have been on hospice and they want to get back. So that impacts that. So I definitely think that's a really kind of an interesting way. I don't think a lot of people, other than they think of doing memorials or things like that. But there is other ways you can grieve.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's where I do think, once again, that kind of grief is love in action. You see that.
Yeah, I love the idea of just there are other ways to grieve than just what we've normalized as being what it means to grieve. And again, grieving as an action as opposed to just feeling grief and experiencing it that way. I'm going to put this out in the air right now. We're going to have you back to have a full conversation because there's so much that I want to tap into. We're already running out of time. So I have just a couple more questions for you. Again, thank you for coming in and sharing some of this and giving us even just this short piece of time. First of these last few questions, we talked about different actions, different types and ways of grieving. Also that everybody has their own experience with grief. What do you think the biggest misconception about the grieving process is?
Oh, I love this. And it might not be totally the way, but one of the main things I really wanted to talk about today, that's really been on my heart. You talked about speaking from the heart. And I'm trying to say this without it being controversial. I don't mean it in that kind of way. Now you're probably like, oh no, we need to edit. That's not what I mean. But biggest misconception is that we think we can fix other people. And it is our job, and it is not our job to do that. And like I said, it's never done in a malicious way. I don't think because these are people we care about, but we are so uncomfortable with sitting with people when they're upset, crying, that we want to say, get better.
Right.
And I have to say, with working with lots of grieving individuals, and including myself too, or even talking with people, that's not what we want.
Sure.
But that's really the biggest misconception is kind of like, well, we need to have someone say, come on, get over it.
Yeah.
Or, you can move on. It's time to move on. But no, we need to be able just to sit with them and be comfortable. And we do not do a great job as humans with being able to sit comfortably in silence.
Yep.
And we feel like we have to fix it, and that's not our job. And it's not our responsibility to do that. So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions I have came across.
I love it. I 100% agree. So I'm adopted, and over the last 4 years, I've been going on this journey of understanding kind of what that means and the loss and grief associated with the act of adoption. And I think that's a huge misconception for people, is just understanding that the savior aspect of it isn't actually a good thing. It's now a part of what's pushing this narrative that adoption is only a positive thing. And now we are learning about counter narratives, and we're building out a more nuanced idea of what that means. Yeah. And I think it's right in line. So thank you for sharing that. What does, and I know you now live in Noblesville, but you have experience here in Indianapolis. What does Indianapolis mean to you, or how do you define Indianapolis?
Yeah, so I do think about this often because I'm just amazed by I love what's going on in Indy right now and the Renaissance I feel like we're going through. It's exciting times to be here.
For sure.
And I love to brag about and tell my friends who live out of state. But you know how I would define it? And this might sound a little odd, but this is a compliment. I think we're an underdog. And I love an underdog.
For sure.
Right? I'm the one who's always going to root for the underdog. But I say that because I have worked at a lot of events.
Yeah.
Like Indiana Sports Corps. I've worked a lot with the Big Ten. I volunteered here, for the Super Bowl. And the number of times I remember people coming from out of state and saying, we just didn't expect this to be, we love it here. And they're so shocked. And I just want to be like, yeah, we've been trying to tell you that forever. Come and visit us. But I do think there's a benefit to being the underdog because I think we're able to always constantly prove ourselves, right? So if they don't expect it, but they come here and they're amazed and shocked, I just think that even brings more attention to our city. So an interesting way of thinking about it. But I actually think being an underdog is a very positive thing.
I totally agree. I think we internalize that mentality and it shows up in the bodies of work of all of the people that are doing things in the city. I think we have to put both best feet forward because we're really trying to capture the attention of people who, like you said, aren't from here. And the only way we can do that is to go all out. And I think you see that passion and that drive from a lot of people. So I appreciate that perspective. That's a great definition. Katresha, fantastic to have you here. Thank you so much for this conversation. Definitely gonna have you back because I got a lot of things I want to ask you about grief. But before we let you go, last question. What's the best way for us to support you? How do we follow you? How do we find you? How do we do all the things for you going forward?
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I could give you, I guess, my Instagram account. Actually, I'm very focused on, I'm a big foodie, but I do love supporting local businesses in Indianapolis. That's actually another side passion of mine. So it's A_heart_full_of_whimsy. I don't know why. At the time, I thought that was creative and fun, and I wanted to send a very positive thing into the community.
Definitely.
But that's a very hard, even saying that out loud, I've not said that out loud, actually. I don't think I ever have. But definitely follow me just because I really do try to have some fun. I really try to focus on stuff going on in Indianapolis.
For sure.
Like I said, it's my kind of side project.
Well, it's that balance for the grief and the stuff that you have to deal with on a daily basis too. So it's like you got to have both. You got to find ways to make space for both.
Yeah. And I'm currently working for Brighton Hospice as well. So if you ever want to kind of ask more questions about hospice and things like that too.
For sure. Absolutely. Brighton Hospice.
You can find,
all right.
Find me
Sounds
there.
good. Well, we will have your Instagram handle linked in the show notes as well for people. So make sure you go support Katresha there. Brighton Hospice, if you want to learn more about hospice or have any questions about that process. Katresha Taylor, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for allowing me to have this conversation because I think it's an important conversation.
Well, we're definitely going to keep doing it. Thank you again. Make sure y'all check out Katresha's work and again, everything else in the show notes. Conversation Piece Pod for everything Conversation Piece. Shout out to Life in Indy for sponsoring the series. And until next time, I've been Patrick Armstrong. This has been The Open Door. See y'all soon.